Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Charlotte from the Green Register. In a moment, we're going to be heading into the first event of our Twilight Talk series of this year. And we're going to be looking at modern methods of construction and particularly how the SME workforce can get involved as well. So we're really lucky today. We've got speakers from Bristol Housing Festival, WECA and MOBIE as well. So just a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces ahead of handing over to Jessie Wild from Bristol Housing Festival. If you wouldn't mind just keeping your mics off until it's question and answer time, that would be fantastic. Do keep your videos on. It's lovely to see you. Obviously, if your internet starts to wobble, it might be wise to turn your video off just to increase that bandwidth. At the end of the session, we send over the presentations and also usually a transcript of the chat, because we often have, it's a rich seam of information. People start putting in really useful things that are quite good to have after the event. So if you could just, if you have joined with a different name to the one that you signed up with, if you could just change that on your Zoom profile, that'd be fantastic. So my colleague Lucy is here. She's going to be looking after the tech. So if you've got any issues, please do pop that in the chat box, and Lucy will try and help you if she can. Obviously, localized internet connections, we can't do too much about that, I'm afraid. We won't have a break. It's quite a short session and we've got lots to get through. And we're going to be doing questions and answers at the end. So feel free to pop your questions into the chat throughout as you think of them, and we'll try and pick those up nearer the end. And Jessie's very kindly going to be facilitating those for us. So without further ado, over to Jessie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's great to be here. So thank you so much, everybody, for signing up and coming along. And thank you so much to the Green Register and the Twilight Sessions and everyone who's been involved for inviting us. This is really exciting. So my name is Jessie Wild and I'm the Deputy Project Director for the Bristol Housing Festival. And there's a few of us here that are a team together working on a project called Workforce for the Future, or sorry, rather working on a Workforce for the Future project, which is named MMC for SMEs, so Modern Methods of Construction for Small to Medium Enterprises. The team consists of Bristol Housing Festival, which is myself and Jez Sweetland. Give us a wave, Jez.
Hi there.
Okay, just over there. And then we've also got YTKO, or Building Growth Southwest, which is represented by Phil Stott this evening. Phil, give us a wave. Thanks so much. And we also have MOBIE, who's part of the team, and Mark Southgate is here as part of the team.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. And I'll let them all introduce themselves properly in a moment, but I just want to give you a little bit of context for what this project is. So the project will support kind of traditional construction SMEs across the west of England through a fully funded MMC training, basically helping to bridge this skills gap and future-proof the local workforce, specifically, as I said, around MMC. Modern methods of construction and offsite manufacture are increasingly, you may have seen this on the blurb, that might be why you're here, but they're increasingly seen as a key part of the building industry, and are really set and looking set to provide some key opportunities to improve productivity, to improve how we build homes, attracting new talent to the industry. And the west of England really is taking a lead on that, which is really, really exciting. But there is a bit of a knowledge gap, a little bit of a skills gap, particularly in the construction industry when it comes to modern methods of construction. So this project has been funded in order to especially support SMEs making that transition to upskill themselves across to MMC from kind of more traditional construction elements. So as part of their project, this project, there's going to be kind of events, site visits, training packages, etc., and you'll hear more about those as we go through the various speakers. And you can see as we go through, if you become more interested in particular events, you can look up the events, the site visits, all that kind of thing on the Building Growth Southwest YTKO website or on the Bristol Housing Festival website. You'll find kind of links through. But there is one particular event I just wanted to flag to you that is upcoming, and that is on the 10th of February, 4 p.m. in person. There's an actual in-person event going on, all being well, and that will be at Ashton Gate Stadium in Bristol, a chance to network with suppliers and training providers across the region, but also find out more kind of in person, ask the questions about how this might benefit you if you're an SME. So I'm going to start talking just in a second, but my role in this this hour this evening is to guide you through. So I'm going to sort of introduce the speakers now. I'm not going to stick my nose in between them. I'll let them speak. We'll go from Jez through to Phil through to Mark, and then I will host the Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions, do pop them in the chat, but also feel free to raise your virtual hand, as it were, as we get towards the end. I'll take all the questions at the end of the three speakers just to make it easier. But if you raise your virtual hand, you will come to the front of my screen. So there's so many people on the screen. When you raise your virtual hand, you get brought up to the top. So I don't have a chance of missing you then. So either put it in the box or raise your virtual hand later on. But to start, without further ado, let me hand over to Jez, who's going to start by sharing a little bit about the Bristol Housing Festival and why we've been involved. Thanks, Jez.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just see if I can share this screen. And yeah, it's great to be opportunity to join you all this evening, and thank you for your opportunity and the opportunity to share a bit about the work that we've been involved with. So I'm the project director of the Bristol Housing Festival, and if you've not heard about the Bristol Housing Festival, we set up really with a mission to see how we could reimagine better ways to live in our cities. It was very much focused on the kind of challenge that we saw around the housing crisis. There is something about the kind of the human nature. One of the things that connects all people within a city is the fact that we all have somewhere to live, whether that is a beautiful home or under a bridge. It's something about that stake of connectivity into a city that is a place that we call home. But we recognized as we got into that journey that it was so important not just to fix the housing crisis. You can't, with these wicked problems, just distill one without really starting to think about unintended consequences. And so you then start to think about the emergency of the climate emergency. You then start to think about the ecology crisis. And of course, you very quickly get into the fact that we also have a construction skills challenge. And into that space, one of the things we started to recognize was that modern methods of construction, whilst not a panacea, whilst not a solution to all our problems, as a new and emerging supply chain, could be in a position to be some of the solution, to really rethink about our systems, to think about the way that we curate value and drive delivery into our cities. So that was where we started to really look at and partner with and seek to collaborate around modern methods of construction. And so into that space, we were recognizing here is the context that we're working in, here is the challenge that we face as a city, and where could MMC start to be a supply chain that can bring, quality, affordable, zero carbon houses at pace, working not in silos, but working in collaboration with our cities. And I want at this point to say that if you have experience of MMC, or if it's a cultural heritage you have where, people will regularly talk about prefabs of the past, what we're really talking about is a modernization the way that we build. What we're really talking about is a transition away from the traditional build mindset of everything being done on site into moving into a manufactured supply chain of how we can really drive value, quality, sustainability and standards into our housing. And of course, crucially underpinning that, how we can really monitor and understand the materials that are going to that housing and ensure the way that we can measure the performance of those houses in a much more standard way. So there's huge potential upside. Of course, we're on a journey and we recognize that there's innovation challenge here, there's risk here. And so how do we bring people together to take that innovation journey together, really shaped around the right values and the right vision to do things differently. Into that space, one of the things that we talk a lot about is that this has to be about collaboration. We are working on a series of projects across the city at the moment, and I'll talk about a bit of those in a moment. Obviously, Workforce of the Future is another piece of this collaboration where we really see that not one organization, not one group, not one stakeholder has all the solutions. And particularly the job of the Bristol Housing Festival is really to bring those parties together, to shape what the mission and the vision looks like, and then to sort of one by one say, well, what are the barriers to entry? Why can't we do this differently? Why can't we repurpose and reshape the value about the way that we do things? And that's been our journey for the last 4 years. We set up as a 5-year project. We're about 3.5 years through, and we're now starting to see, I'm delighted to say, real homes coming out of the ground and people having places to live. One of the projects that we've just completed, actually again, led by YTKO, Phil Stott is here today to speak about that as well, but was an Innovate UK project called Inclusive Innovation for Inclusive Growth to enabling housing innovation. And this has been a really important project for us in the sense that it was an opportunity to take 9 demonstrator sites across the city working with 9 different MMC suppliers, and to work with BRE, YTKO, and those different suppliers to say, well, how would you really make space for that innovation culture? So coming out of the ground, as it were, now we have a number of those projects, and I'll refer to those in a minute. But as importantly, we were looking at the culture that sits behind those decision-making processes to unlock that kind of innovation, working very closely with Bristol City Council, who are a key stakeholder of this project, but also looking at issues like procurement and the value chains and the decision-making that sits behind that. And one of the outcomes of that was a piece of work around procurement called Constructing Modern Methods, which is how do you start to assimilate all the data, all the optioneering, as it were, that goes into that decision-making to give those housing commissioners better informed choices, which is particularly problematic when you're looking at new technology. The questions around what asset management, snagging, maintenance, all of these questions cost, the uncertainties that you step into. This was what this project was trying to unlock. And there are a couple of reports there shown on that image where, if you're interested, those reports are on our website, and they're starting to break down the data and the findings of that project that came out from the Innovate UK project. But crucially, it looks like homes. And I think for us, that the driver here has been around affordable homes. It's been a real passion of ours to make sure that we're looking at this social justice issue. And again, what a great partner in Bristol City Council, who have this huge responsibility and challenge to make our city an equitable place to live, and housing being right at the forefront of that social justice. You may have seen some of these projects in the news. So we've had the ZPod scheme called Hope Rise, which was not just about building zero carbon housing, but was also about repurposing a brownfield site. So this is housing that sits above a council car park. And it crucially is, of course, unlocking that land for an alternative use whilst retaining all of the car parking. A couple of other images here. One of the things that Innovate was, it wasn't just about the large, what we call volumetric, which are the kind of the 3D boxes that are then assembled on sites. It was also about our local SMEs with Snug that you can see in the bottom right there, a local home that was assembled on site and then moved, assembled off site and then moved to site. An amazing story about sustainability. And we think it's so important as the MMC sector matures and grows that it represents a broad sector of that supply chain. It can't just be about big PLCs, but how do we really make space for those small house builders? And a couple of images here as well of the scheme with Booklook, which is taking place, 173 homes at the moment. Just nearly 50% of that will be affordable. LNG Modular, that's going to be the first scheme in the country that's been a partnership with the local authority. And there's another scheme there at the bottom with a project called Project Utopia, which is trying to unlock garage sites, which are these really difficult, complex sites to unlock. The drive here is, how do we deliver these quality, sustainable homes at pace? And again, huge credit to Bristol City Council for taking a bit of a lead on some of that opportunity and initiative. But what I wanted to really impart to you today, before I hand on to Phil and to Mark to give you a bit more flavour about this particular project, was, where does this momentum for change come from? Why now modern methods of construction? It's been talked about for a number of years now. And I think what I talk about is this growing momentum that we're seeing. So Mark Farmer, back in 2016, was appointed by the government to look into the construction industry at large. You may have heard about his report, Modernise or Die. Well, you know, that report's now 5 years old. He's just done a bit of a review of that, but he's the government sort of expert now on modern methods of construction, and recently wrote a further report, Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation, which has again really pushed the case for why we need this new supply chain. It's not about competition with traditional build, it's about additionality. Into that space, we've got the West of England looking really creatively about how it can fund and support. We've got the Future Home Standard, which is driving that kind of review that's going on internally for a lot of the house building and construction sector. How are we going to start to achieve the standards regularly, consistently, and within budget that are going to be required of us? We've got competitions, international competitions launched by Nesta and UN Habitat, really driving this question about sustainability, cost and pace of housing delivery to tackle social justice. So you've got this moving force, a context, and add to that, we've got the kind of what I would call barriers to entry being unlocked. So building better, constructing modern methods I referred to earlier, innovation in procurement that is answering the questions that a lot of the local authority and housing association commissioners have had about how they breach into that innovation risk of MMC. But it's also about this building momentum. So 2020, Rick's produced a report, very interesting report about why modular is now for here. You can't really just take the heat out of this this growing agenda. We saw Trowers and Hamlins do quite a regular survey into the state really of the modular industry, and their recent report said 83% of private builders and developers said that the environmental and sustainability advantages of MMC are important to their business. So 83% is a significant move in terms of that building momentum of businesses, not just the traditional sort of MMC suppliers, but that broader supply chain. Add to that, this was a critical moment where Homes England came alongside and said to all of their strategic partners under what's called the Government's Affordable Housing Grant, which will be responsible for thousands of new affordable homes across the UK, that all of their strategic partners have to deliver 25% of their housing through MMC. And that has been a significant game changer, particularly housing associations. Before that, I think we're finding it difficult to find the justifications to take that innovation risk. Now they're incentivized, they're awarded, their funding is conditional, and it's seen a huge shift in uptake. And we're seeing that as well in terms of the investment that's going into this sector. This NHBC Foundation report said that MMC factory-made homes could help unlock the UK's housing crisis and contribute to tackling the climate emergency of the lessons of the past are learnt. And critically, this was speaking about the levels of investment that are now going into this sector. And we see that locally in terms of the UK, in terms of Goldman Sachs investing in an organisation called Top Hat. We've seen that with one of our partners, Modular, who have, we're seeing this sort of aggregation of the supply chain where CEMEX are putting funding in to support them. And of course, LNG Modular, again, another project that is coming to Bristol at the moment on Bonington Walk, where they're continuing to invest with a real priority for affordable homes. So the multi-million-pound investments that we're seeing going into the sector have continued apace. And that's, again, unlocked for the housing associations with the Homes England strategic partners, the kind of numbers that you're going to see here, where we've got partnerships between MMC providers and the RP sector. And what about Bristol? Well, we've got the booklet scheme, which is the first in the UK. As I said, that one of the projects that we'll be able to talk about later is an opportunity to come and see that site in person. We've got the scheme with Bonington Walk with LNG Modular. And then recently, one of the other projects that we'll be able to do a site tour with is this scheme with Midge Group, a really interesting project just down on Bath Road in Bristol, which was effectively an unviable scheme where modern methods of construction, the engineering solutions, have been able to unlock that scheme with a social housing provider. And I think the pace is going to continue. We've just seen recently that Bristol City Council has announced a review of its process for Hengrove, and we're looking there at unlocking 1,400 homes, and they're talking about innovative solutions with a real focus of driving further MMC. So I'm going to leave it there, but what I wanted to really get across to you was that there is a growing movement. There's a growing capacity. There's a growing enthusiasm and interest to engage with MMC. I think in the past, it would have been justifiable for quite a lot of SMEs to go, well, this may or may not happen. That moment, I believe, is gone. And so what I really want you to sort of take into mind as you listen now to Phil and then Mark is this is a moment where I think MMC is here to stay. It's an opportunity for you to engage. And crucially, it's a partnership where we can really incubate the values into that supply chain, that skills agenda as it matures. And on that note, Phil, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Jez. Really fantastic. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that, and I'll just go into, there we go. So yes, good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name's Phil Stott. I'm the head of construction and sustainability at a company called YTKO. We deliver a number of projects under our Building Growth Southwest banner. And obviously this program, Unlocking MMC for SMEs, really came about, and I'm aware of obviously the audience today is it contains a lot of people from the retrofit sector, and that's an area where I've spent many years. I think in 2014 I was called the breakthrough by Green Build in retrofit, and obviously what I delivered entirely solved the problem apparently, but as we're unfortunately still here talking about retrofit, maybe it was an award I should be giving back. But what I wanted to add tonight was that this project really comes off the back of the MMC sort of, I'd say, growth and ambition. But for us, we were talking about MMC in Europe many, many years ago. And it definitely is, I'd say, in the last 4 or 5 years where we've really seen the market responds to the need in a large way. The project that we pulled together as part of this sort of funded initiative with the West of England Combined Authority via the European Social Funds, really looked at the bit that I have always felt has been missing from the MMC pie, and that is skills. And I wouldn't say that this is a situation where skills and training need to form a central element of MMC. And having spent 2 years working with 9 different MMC providers, I'm really convinced that actually there is a common element of MMC skills that can work across different MMC partners. And what this project does is it really brings together the opportunity for the SME, the small and medium enterprise, the small business. UK construction is predominantly dominated by micro businesses under 10 employees, and that includes your sole traders as well. In fact, of all the sectors in the UK economy, UK construction has the most SMEs, micro businesses and sole traders of any other sector. Furthermore, that number is almost over 90%. So actually, although we all know the household names in construction, the likes of Keepmoat, Wilmot Dixon, BAM Nuttall, what we're actually seeing is the whole sector is dominated by small businesses. And these are small businesses with huge, long subcontracts. So when we talk to a client about who their contractor is, they'll say, you know, proudly that our contractor is Keepmoat, who's building these homes over here. And we'll say, okay, well, our Keepmoat actually building it. And Keepmoat will hold their hands up and say, well, no, we don't build it. We let out our subcontracts, and then someone else lets out their subcontracts, and someone else lets out their subcontracts, until you very quickly get down to the very small businesses that actually underpin the construction sector. And my concern was that pretty much none of those businesses knew anything about MMC at all. I went to a site once in Bristol. It was actually a redevelopment of a Victorian hospital. And I saw an MMC system being used alongside a traditional block and brick system being used. And what was really surprising is actually those two different subcontractors, those different gangs on site, they weren't looking at all at what others were doing. And what's more is, as we've worked for 2 years in the Innovate UK project with different MMC providers, we're discovering quite quickly, and it's not a worry yet, but it is a realization that a lot of MMC supply chain is entirely different to construction. They use in-house supply chain. They give people jobs instead of subcontracts. They train them up in their systems. And now this is all great in terms of MMC delivering really high quality homes. However, the gap in the market is, what if you're a traditional house builder in Bristol in the west of England who actually doesn't get a job with an MMC provider because, you know, you live in the west of England, and a lot of the MMC providers, because they're manufacturing systems, they tend to be located in the north. And that was the issue that this project is really sort of grasping the nettle of. The uncomfortable truth that the more you build with MMC, potentially the fewer local jobs you'll be creating. And for us, we felt that that was an unacceptable compromise. We really wanted to push the agenda for local employment. We wanted SMEs to grow in the marketplace. We wanted small businesses in the construction sector to be at the forefront of this modern method of building. And actually what we were finding is that they just didn't know. So this project brings together 3 core themes. The first is a common competency framework. Now, if you'll talk to any MMC provider in the land, they will tell you their system's the best. They'll tell you their system has had many, many years of development, R&D, billions of pounds spent on it, and actually it can do everything that you would want. Why would you look elsewhere? And that's fine, but they'll make it sound like there aren't any common areas of truth where a local construction company could work on more than one system. And what we found when we worked with these 9 different partners was actually there are some common areas. There are a few little areas, a few little pinch points where actually we could hopefully find a common sort of ground between these different systems. And when you consider some of these systems only switch on the factory when they're producing 1,000 homes, and some of these systems only build one home at a time, it really was quite a big landscape to try and find a common area. But we think we're getting there. And to be honest, it's Mark's job to make sure we do. Then going forward, after that, we are going to do some funded pilots of training. But one bit in between that is awareness raising. The whole reason we're here tonight is because we need some outputs for the project, but more importantly, we want people just to understand that MMC is here and it's coming. We want people to understand and be interested that this is the future of construction and get excited about it. It might be that at the moment your business is too busy and you've got too much work on to possibly think about MMC at all. And the reality is actually that it's already here. There are 500 homes being built in Bristol at the moment which use MMC, and they won't necessarily have made use of local trades in construction. And for us, we really think that that is the opportunity now that we want SMEs to just start to understand and have a passing interest in. That's literally the extent of some of these parts of this project. We want to engage the SME market. We want to talk to local trades in the west of England and make you at least have a vague interest in what MMC can offer. And at the end of the day, hopefully it's an area where not just in terms of new build, but also in terms of low carbon retrofit, it's an area which potentially will underpin both of those sectors over the next 5 years. The next part of that is funded pilots for training. So once we've developed these common areas of training and need that we feel SMEs would like to need and would benefit from, and most importantly, the MMC providers would recognize as being a need for their business, then we can provide funding for those pilots. Again, these aren't huge numbers. We're not looking for 2,000 people to train or anything like that. What we're looking to do is just start the process, start the pilot of the process, even I'd say, to just start lifting the lid on what MMC is. MMC by its nature is hidden away in factories. And we want SMEs to start to look at that and go, yeah, I can see how that fits together. I can see how I understand how that works. MMC can sometimes sound a bit like it's like building an iPhone. It can feel like it's built in hermetically sealed factories with high quality men in white coats who are only able to deal with these specific units or panels or cassettes. The reality with MMC is that it needs fit out, it needs scaffolding, it needs groundworks, it needs crane lifting. And all of these different trades have roles to play in the siting and the placement of MMC units. They have roles to play as well in the construction of panelized systems, because we're not talking about big solid houses arriving on the back of a lorry. We're talking about flat pack cassettes that need to be assembled on site. There's steel fixing, there's steel works, there's cross-laminated timber, so we need some chippies. There's endless errors that occur on site. Obviously much less than maybe traditional construction, but there are a lot of errors on site, and these errors can be remedied by local trades. So we are looking to recruit and create a collaboration, a cooperative of local SME trades who've got an interest in working with MMC. So that when a different MMC provider arrives in Bristol, they can obviously work with our ready pump-primed supply chain. And that, for me, is the way that we overcome the barriers of creating local jobs for SMEs. Because actually, and this is maybe getting a bit too much into the world of procurement, but it's a big challenge for MMC when it comes to building homes, because actually, if they don't create a lot of local jobs, they don't do very well on social value. The other part of MMC is it offers huge gains in terms of sustainability. It offers huge gains in terms of performance. And so for us, when we saw this project, we really felt that there was an opportunity to address and build high quality homes that are sustainable, low carbon, and can be delivered at pace to tackle the affordable housing crisis. But they had to create those local jobs. And it's those local jobs that form a central part of the project. Very quickly, we are obviously joined by MOBIE, who are experts in training and delivery of training. Mark is going to speak a little bit about some of the skills and training element later. But I also wanted to just create a sort of a real clear understanding that the audience today is, and obviously we've worked with the Green Register previously, is predominantly made of individuals who've got an understanding of the sustainability and the low carbon within the built environment. And one thing I wanted to just make clear is MMC is not just all about new build. MMC is also about modular retrofit. And that was something I was very keen to push in the bid that we submitted to the West of England Combined Authority. I strongly feel, having seen how the retrofit agenda is I suppose it's a bit like the elephant in the room in terms of all of the UK government targets to meet net zero carbon by 2050 in the West of England. It's obviously, there's an ambition for 2030, which means you've got 8 years to go, chop chop. And then also in other areas as well, they're only really talking about new builds through the Future Home Standards, and they're also talking about changes in decarbonisation of the grid, and they're also talking about the removal of gas boilers and replacing them with air source heat pumps. And what was interesting about modular retrofit is actually, in terms of retrofit, and if you look at the retrofit sector, it's dominated by a number of different funding streams like the energy company obligation, the renewable heat incentive. If you take the funding away, it's always slightly difficult to push the retrofit sector in terms of creating a core market demand. But MMC sort of tackles that again. It doesn't necessarily look at funding like the energy company obligation, the renewable heat incentive. It looks at schemes such as, can this work from a maintenance point of view? Can this work from a guarantee point of view? So you see systems like Energiesprong being retrofitted to homes, and actually where I based down in Exeter, there's an ERDF pilot scheme of that. I work with some colleagues up in Nottingham, and there's a pilot scheme up there as well. And where Energiesprong, for example, which requires, you know, wide scale modular retrofit of a huge number of homes, so you get the economies of scale, it also then guarantees the works for 30 years. So if you work for a housing association or a registered provider, it makes sense from just a complete cost return basis, which is why I do personally feel, and again, this is just my opinion, I do personally feel that modular retrofit will be the key to unlocking the actual net zero carbon agenda. Interestingly, actually, we've got to do 2 homes per minute, according to the UK Green Building Council, up until 2050 to retrofit all homes to meet net zero carbon. And again, that for me is a huge upscale in the pace. So MMC modular, which can provide that scale, can provide that speed, is hugely important. I spent about 4 years looking at the wonders of the performance gap and the issues and the horrors that traditional construction sometimes make. MMC is a huge part of the solution to this performance gap. The performance gap, for anyone who doesn't know, is a building is designed to perform wonderfully. It leaves the architects, goes into planning, everyone signs it off, then it actually gets to construction. And unfortunately, due to some basic skills issues, the building can perform worse than it was designed to do. And actually, sometimes they say that can be up to 5 times worse than it was designed to build. So you can have a councillor saying that this is a wonderful passive house standard home, and actually it then ends up performing at EPCC. The problems with the performance gap are all caused by joins, thermal bridges, gaps in insulation. And when you have MMC, when you have large scale panelized systems and a manufacturing process, a lot of that can be eliminated. So you do end up with tight, thermally efficient homes as designed. And if they don't perform like that, then the manufacturing process allows you to refine, and constantly improve that. Then the third part as well is I just wanted to say that the Workforce for the Future project, obviously 100 odd people today on the call, which is fantastic. Thank you for joining us. We're doing MMC for SMEs, but we're also the entry point to a whole suite of funded support programs, including the Community Renewal Fund, including apprenticeship support and funding. Our project is one of the few that is really getting out there into the construction and built environment. So we'd be really keen to have people come to us, and then obviously we can maybe broker you into other support structures. And that really important event on the 10th of February at Ashton Gate, please do register for it. My colleague Lisa dropped the Eventbrite link into the chat earlier. That is an opportunity as well to hear more about the different funding streams that are available. And personally as well, one thing I'd like to just give a shout out to as well is the University of West of England, who are doing a Community Renewal Fund program. And the Community Renewal Fund is basically a 6-month, count them, only 6 months funding window where they are providing green businesses with skills and support as well. So if you come to our event in February, if you register with us, we are able to then broker you amongst different people, and you can hear about all the full suite of funding and support that are on offer. I would again just echo Jesse's comments. The events and the workshops that the Bristol Housing Festival are running as part of Unlocking MMC are really, really fortunate for us to be part of that. It would be so difficult to arrange the number of site visits, to arrange the number of access to MMC providers that they can offer. So please do have a look at the events, pop along to a workshop, have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee. We're not going to bore you to death with PowerPoint. We're about getting people and showing and lifting the veil on MMC and showing you live sites in Bristol and around the west of England. So I'll shut up now. I'm sure I've gone way over my time. Usually Jesse shouts at me at this point, but thank you very much. And obviously Mark's now just going to talk a little bit about skills and some of the initial training ideas that we've got for the project.
Thank you, Phil. So it feels feeling a bit like a relay race, so I'm picking up the baton now. So I'll do my best not to drop it in the next 10 minutes before I hand over to Jesse. I will just do a screen share as well. So hopefully you can see the slide. There we go. So my name's Mark Southgate. I'm Chief Executive of MOBIE. That's a very grand title because MOBIE is quite a small charity, just 3 employees and 5 trustees. One of which is this man, George Clark, who set up MOBIE. And George set up for 3 reasons, probably. One, that he's passionate about home as being the most important piece of architecture in our lives. And frankly, that we don't build good enough homes in the UK. We need to do a lot better. Secondly, he's really passionate about getting young people into the built environment industries, and he wanted to do that. And third is that he believes we can make building homes more efficient, including using MMC, not just MMC, using manufacturing methods in general, but modern methods of construction in particular. And relevant to this, one of our other trustees is Mark Farmer, the author of that report that Jez was talking about, and currently the government's MMC guru. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the skills approach and why skills is so important. But maybe it's just helpful to, we've talked a lot about MMC, and I do laugh that our project has managed to squeeze in 2 acronyms in a very short title, but SMEs and MMC. But there's a 7-point category which definition framework, which I think Jesse circulated. But actually, this is a slightly simplified version, and really we're talking about volumetric, which is what people call modular, which is basically it's a module, does what it says on the tin, it's built in the factory, transported, probably craned into place. Panelized systems, which I think Phil was talking about, which is similar sort of thing, pre-manufactured in the factory, but taken on back to the lorries and then assembled. And then sub-assemblies and components, which can be smaller parts of the manufacture of the building. I mean, I'm talking homes in this particular instance. This could be factories, schools, student accommodation, where it's quite often used. And then hybrid systems, which might be a combination of all, and that can include pods. So quite often hotels and student accommodation these days will have bathroom pods, which are fully assembled and basically plug and play effectively. They're pre-manufactured. So another word you hear quite often is pre-manufactured value, and that's the sort of the issue. It's about how you use manufacturing processes to do a lot of the work off-site and then take it to site and do the assembly, etc. required. And I think that's important to remember when we come to skills, because as Phil said, you know, when you're manufacturing stuff in a factory, those don't tend to move around unless we talk about flying factories. We could come back to that, but they're small scale stuff. But yeah, the potential for local employment is around the groundworks, the assembly, the after-site care, etc. These are just a few of the headlines. Lazy headlines: can modular homes solve the UK crisis? Well, they're not going to solve the UK housing crisis, but they are a major part towards it. So I think that's where government's interest is, because not only is this an increased stream of housing, but government, I think they're quite interested because it's often new entrants. So this is not the same house builders who've been building pretty much the same amount of houses over the last 20, 30 years. These are new entrants who are bringing additional units in and doing them in a different way. So that's where the government interest is. And interestingly, people like McKinsey or Savills have both predicted that by the end of this decade, about 20% of our homes will be built using MMC, which is about, that's a significant increase. We're probably around about 6 to 9% at the moment. So it's definitely going to be an increasing part of it, and therefore my view is, for anybody entering the profession now, if we're teaching anybody to come into the construction profession, we ought to be telling them about MMC, because they may not directly work on it, but they'll be working on sites where it's being applied and they need to know about it. I'm part of the Offsite Alliance as well. I'm a director there, and we've got a skills and competencies group which has been looking at what are the skills needs for MMC, but I think this is also what the skills needs for a modern built environment construction profession. And you'll see things on there like design clearly, but also digital features strongly, modern methods features strongly, new technology features strongly. And what we're trying to do in this project is take some of those and see what is that, what's the relevance of those in relation to SMEs, what are the key things that they should be learning. And I think there's probably 3 key ones. Digital, undoubtedly, it needs to be an increasing part of the built environment. It's I'm a planner by profession. I always think it's slightly insane that the way we try and engage people in the planning profession is showing them 2D drawings, often on paper, of things which are 3D. And actually, digital gives us real opportunity to show stuff in 3D, which has a real benefit in relation to planning, but also has a real benefit in relation to building performance. And I think this is where BIM, building information modeling, comes in and becomes real, because if you've got something that's been pre-manufactured, it is likely to perform in the same way as the factory when it gets to site. We often know we're brilliant in the construction industry doing workarounds, we're masters at it, we've probably got PhDs in it, but actually you've got a product which is probably bearing a very close relationship to what was put on plan and in the design, and that's how you can align the two. So your actual building is going to be a very close assimilation to your digital. It's what gets described as a digital twin. But that has real opportunities both in construction, but particularly in terms of operation. So digital, undoubtedly one of the areas where we've got to concentrate people. MMC and in its different forms, so you can see panelized bottom left, you can see a modular pod, an ILCA pod going in top right. You can think about the transportation issues, you can think about the issues about how that's manufactured. And the different stages of that. So design, we need to think about different elements. We need to think different elements in the manufacturing, but actually in terms of the assembly and the assembly crews and construction as well. So that is different, and we need people to increasingly understand that. And as I said, if they're not working directly on it, they need to understand it, because increasingly, with 25%, homes in requiring 25% of their schemes to be MMC, you're going to be working on sites where MMC is common and it is different. And then finally, retrofit, and Phil talked about that in great detail. It's another part of the retrofit and carbon. So clearly, all of those are, I think, are the 3 main areas where we need to be doing more skills training, etc. So that's what we're developing at the moment. A lot of you are architects, I see on this conversation. So sort of the latest bit of guidance around this is the 2nd edition of the DFMA overlay for the Green Plan of Works. And I think the interesting thing from the way we've traditionally done things is that this moves design right to the beginning. This moves everybody's ability to get the scheme right to the beginning. As planners, there's a rude shock coming to councillors who might want to change a scheme at the very end, because if you're using MMC, that's just not going to be possible. If you've designed something just coming factory, that is it. So actually, in one way, it means we've got to have the conversation earlier. And in another way, in relation to Phil's comment about does the building look like and perform like the building which is on the plans, well, increasingly it will, because it's coming from a manufacturing environment, and what you see is what you get. But this is really important for those, anybody who wants a bit more information, really helps. But everybody's got to move their attention up the agenda in terms of design and in terms of ensuring that performance is nailed down at the very early stage of the process. We've done a little bit of work already to try and bring some of this into modern construction learning. So we've worked with Pearson as MOBIE to introduce new elements to their construction and built environment course. And that includes stuff around renewable energy, obviously for housing, which is so important in the climate agenda. And you'll see on there the offsite and alternative construction methods. And what's interesting, and again, this shows the shift, 18 to 24 months ago, we really struggled to find any colleges who were interested in delivering this. That has changed in the last 12 months, and there are increasing numbers of colleges who've either picked it up or absolutely plan to start delivering this September or at the latest next September. And some of the colleges are investing in estates around MMC as well, so bringing in modern methods into their training environment as well. But this is our final slide, and this is where we are at. So we're at early stages of the project yet. It's an 18-month project, and we're sort of 3 to 4 months in. But this is where we've arrived at. in terms of what we think the main requirements are for SMEs in relation to modern methods of construction. So it's particularly these 5 areas on the left. So digital skills and construction, understanding the manufacturing process and techniques and what they bring along, understanding a bit about new materials or alternative materials, obviously sustainability and low carbon. And I think we need to have retrofit in there because there are some schemes where that will be relevant, but a lot of these are interchangeable anyway. But this is effectively what we want to start testing now with yourselves, and particularly with SMEs. Are these the right things? There's no point in us, and going back to the work we've done with the Offsite Alliance, we've again tested this with the MMC industry. We've come up what we think is required, but absolutely want to test that to destruction to see whether that is what is required. There's no point going to try and train people in things they don't want to learn, and you'll find they'll vote with their feet and not turn up. So I guess our first test is having assembled these and picking them up. Are these the key things? Are these the key areas? And this is obviously of interest to colleges as well, because they don't want to be providing training that doesn't relate to a market which they can then tap into and is going to vote with its feet and come to colleges. And then on the right, you'll see those numbers. We've then tried to relate that to what might be new units on new qualifications, so be it BTEC or certificates. They can be run as individual courses, and particularly for SMEs, we're thinking about doing with CPD and as short courses that people can learn, and starting with a sort of made simple, and then maybe a second level or in a bit more detail for those who really wanted to get in and maybe get into the system. But equally, it would be good if we can produce them in a form that they could be picked up as units which qualify for qualifications. For somebody, a new starter, an SME who wants to gain a qualification, then why shouldn't they be able to do this as a CPD thing and then port that across to becoming a qualification? All that's to be explored, but that's effectively where we see the focus. But I go back to those 3 headlines. It's increased digital skills, it's increased understanding of manufacturing and how that plays out in a construction environment, and it's that carbon and retrofit agenda. So I will now pass the baton, hopefully undropped, across to Jessie, and it's over to you guys to pick up the baton in terms of Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Jez. As I said before, if you do have questions, do raise your virtual hand, because that'll help me kind of manage all the various questions coming in. So there should be a button you can click, which will bring you to the top and the front of my screen if you do have questions. While you're finding that button, though, I'm going to address some of the ones that were coming up through the chat to start with. So there was a question in from Gary. Phil, I'm going to come to you for this one. The question was, is the funding available for Wales? So I was just wondering if you could, Phil, just go over the eligibility criteria.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Jessie. So this is tied to the West of England Combined Authority. Unfortunately, that means it's West of England wide. So we've got South Gloss, Baines, Bath and North East Somerset, Bristol, and then North Somerset. What I would say, though, is that we are working closely with an organisation called the Construction Industry Training Board, and they're very prominent in Wales. And they have a number of funds that are available for SMEs. In fact, they've got one called the Flexible Training and Skills Fund, which is £10,000 for an SME to be able to spend on any sort of training that they recognise is tied to their construction profession. So please do get in touch with us. Visit the website, register your interest, come along to the event at Ashton Gate. And we will definitely try and help you. What's more, I would say, is that the idea is we're trying to create a one-stop shop. There's so much funding, there's so much support around. It's horribly complicated for everyone. YTKO just tried to hide the wiring. So we know quite a lot about what funding is available at the moment, and we're more than happy to meet with businesses, talk to them, and make sure we can broker support which is most relevant to them. So just because you're in Wales, please do still keep in touch, and we can have a more in-depth diagnostic conversation going forward.
Thanks so much, Phil. One of the other questions that we've got, Jez, I'm going to come to you on this, was specifically about MMC through smaller companies. So one of the questions was around, we found whilst trying to use MMC for a development of only 5 houses that they've been able to get unable to get anywhere because it's been deemed as too small a number. So do you have any advice about kind of using MMC on a small scale in that sense?
Yeah, I can sympathise. I think certainly if you think about some of what we call the volumetric suppliers, they really don't like to can't make their scales work really for sort of schemes with less than 75 homes. But when you start to get into more the the panelised, some of the CLT systems, there's no doubt that we've seen real interest and engagement with wanting to look at those smaller schemes. I think what I'd say is the other thing is then understanding the SME market a bit. So we've started to do some of that work. We could certainly, if you want to drop an email to us, we could make a couple of recommendations about organisations to connect with. There's also some of this sort of optioneering that's going on where you can, something like constructing modern methods, where it might be you can start to aggregate some of that information as well. But what I would say is it's understanding what the particular MMC market is looking for. If you think about the traditional build sector, you've got this huge sort of industry that's focused on those bigger schemes, but then you've got a lot of those smaller house builders that will do the housing extension, will build the one or twos. And I think that's what we're going to see with the MMC sector as well. The big noise right now is certainly about where that big money is going and the sort of the Homes England strategic partners, that's big numbers. But we are absolutely seeing a really innovative, often values-led, environmentally led, conscious-led small MMC market, and we're really excited by that. We think that's a crucial part of how the MMC sector will develop, and of course crucially about that social value, because those can be locally owned as well in terms of bringing job skills creation as well. So absolutely get in touch, and we'd love to make some connections where we know where you are and make some intros.
Brilliant. And then just sort of following on from that, kind of just if you had anything else to add, Jimmy is part of a fledgling community-led housing project in Bristol, and they're looking at the kind of disposal strategy, land disposal policy through the council to get some land for their community-led housing. And Jimmy specifically asked, because they're interested in pursuing MMC, whether anyone has any good starting points for looking into MMC in a bit more detail and any kind of good connections and partners. And I suppose we'd say similarly, do feel free to get in touch. But is there anything else you'd like to add specifically on a community-led housing front?
No, I think just with the community-led housing front, there's some very good, and hopefully you're connected into this, the sort of the community-led housing community in Bristol itself, because we've done quite a bit of work, again, supporting them to build their understanding of MMC, because again, thinking even, for example, about the opportunity to aggregate a couple of sites where you've got one or two organisations working with one supplier, that can start to help with the economy. So what I would say with your community-led housing journey is just don't go alone. You've probably already discovered that it's not always a straightforward journey. It's going to have real highs and lows along the way. But what I would say is make sure you're doing that in those networks, because you'll be able to get there a lot quicker and learn on that journey. So if you need instructions into those networks, we're very happy to provide those.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jez. And then Phil, coming back to you, and then Mark, if you had anything else to add. We've had a few different questions about retrofit. So somebody talking about any energy sprung potentially being a bit of an expensive option. So whether there's any others. Andrew mentioned whether there are any good kind of modular retrofit options that you can talk about. And then David asked whether there are any good retrofit examples in MMC as well. So just wondering if you had anything to hand, any specific examples on the tip of your tongue you might be able to share with us.
Yeah, I've got a few. It's interesting. Obviously, Energy Sprong is one of a number, sort of like the BBC here. Energy Sprong is one of a number of providers, and not a preferred provider. But I would say that they are potentially one of the better known brands. Obviously, it comes from the Netherlands, and what their ethos of an Energy Sprong type retrofit MMC approach is that it has to be done at scale, it has to be done at pace, it has to look great. There's a design requirement, it has to be carbon positive in terms of what comes out at the end, and actually the speed of it has to be done within around about a week. Now, the pilots I've seen obviously aren't meeting those criteria. And I know that, for example, in the West Midlands Combined Authority, there is a large initiative there to sort of look at an MMC modular retrofit solution, which isn't maybe as sort of, I wouldn't say it's not a level issue, but it is around a case of being so stringent against different criteria as Energy Sprong. So they may be willing to not be carbon positive, or maybe they're not so obsessed with the timescale delivery. Having said that, the solutions that I have seen, particularly I think the pilot in Nottingham, which was done through a company called Melius Homes, and they work closely with UK Energy Sprong, and are actually led by I think again that was a local authority scheme. That was an example of an early adopter which worked really well. And I know that some of the conversations, and again, it's all at conversation stage, it's all at pilot stage, so this is very new. I do think that what they're finding is that just regardless for housing associations and RPs, then the numbers do stack up in terms of what are we going to do about leaky, drafty, unhealthy homes with damp, mold, leaks everywhere, which will cost a huge amount to retrofit. You know, these housing associations, I was talking to a housing association this week, they're just starting to look at all of their homes in their portfolio, and they're going, okay, what's the most cost-effective solution here? And actually, to get them to meet net zero, they're thinking, okay, can we look at a system which will do this at scale and then guarantee the works for 30 years and eliminate all of the tenants calling up and arguing about the quality of their homes. And so I think MMC retrofit, although maybe price is a bit of an issue at the moment, I think as we're seeing the market innovate, and this is exactly the same with MMC across the board, we did a whole project on the fact that everyone went MMC is too expensive compared to traditional new build. And actually all the data showed that it's completely comparable when you take into ideas of what we call life cycle value. So in terms of not just the build cost, but we actually look at the cost of maintenance, when we actually look at the cost of healthcare benefits, when we look at the cost of social value, actually MMC did stack up and was entirely comparable to the cost of traditional build. And I just saw one other question in the chat, which asked about housing archetypes on modular retrofit. Just to say, I do understand that it's an issue, but what we do have quite a lot of is sort of street by streets, and instead of doing home by home. So I think, although you're entirely right, there are a huge number of different housing archetypes in the UK. We've got a very weird housing stock in this country, which is all very different from the pre-1919 down my way in Devon. We have solid wall homes, huge number of solid wall homes. And so these are, you know, unique challenges. However, I would say that when you get into housing associations and RPs, you do start to tackle what I call the low-hanging fruit of retrofit, and you do start to look at a similar typology of housing on a street-by-street basis. Then potentially you do have some quick wins there of homes that can be retrofitted using an MMT system similar to Energy Sprong. But I'm more than happy to share some details and some case studies as well. We do have an event in the works, which will be inviting Energy Sprong to come talk as well. And I did see that there was a comment in the chat that Green Register have also run their event on Energy Sprong, I think, last year. So I'm sure there's lots of info there that can be circulated and shared to the attendees.
Brilliant, thank you.
Can I just jump in there, Jesse? I think it was interesting just before we came on, we're talking to Charlotte, and certainly one of the views of Bristol City Council, I think, about this whole retrofit MMC skills agenda is also that, you know, we all recognise that in terms of the journey to sort of decarbonising and creating energy efficiency in our homes is not going to be fixed by new build. It really is the retrofit challenge. I mean, that's absolutely clear to everybody. But I think what we also see is that as the MMC sector and that supply chain and that skill sector matures, that will also help really mature that supply chain. That is going to be a key part of how we look at, you know, more efficient retrofit solutions en masse. And so we see these two things very interrelated. So the skills that we need in the new build, and of course new build is easier to start with because you're creating economic value, that will help mature that supply chain. It will help drive those standards, and that we believe will also be a key part to unlocking the retrofit agenda. And certainly speaking to the Bristol City Council about that is a key part of what their strategy will be. So see these very much as related solutions, we believe, as a way of tackling that challenge.
Joseph and Philip picked up pretty well. Just a couple of things. And I think if you think about sort of part of MMC being standardization of components and parts, that's where it comes into play. So it's around, this might be quite a relatively small scale retrofit MMC, but it's around using those standard parts and which are most effective for individual housing types. Well worth watching what's going on in Wales, the optimised retrofit programme over there, particularly the consortium being led by Sarah Homes, which is, I think, got 27 registered social landlords. They're going in and doing individual assessments of buildings to create individual pathways to zero. So I think one of the risks around, there's a couple of big risks around retrofit. One is one size fits all, which we know in the past doesn't work. And the second one is we don't train people up and skill them up to do it properly, and it all fails in terms of implementation because the actual delivery didn't work. Not that the scheme was not good, but the delivery didn't work. So in terms of the not having a one size fits all, worth looking at Sarah Homes and the optimized retrofit, and that consortium has got a skills group of which we are a part, which is looking at what are the skills needs around retrofit, and how do we ensure with this massive amount of need, we've got decent programs to train people in the right things, because that is a huge risk. And we've seen other green schemes fail on the basis of, let's say cowboys or less well skilled people or educated people coming in to deliver the program. So that's something that particular program is trying to deal with.
Brilliant.
And I'm really keen that what goes on in Wales is not forgotten, and that we do cross across the Bristol Channel. It's absolutely vitally important.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark, Jez and Phil. I haven't seen any more questions. I think I have hit most of them. If I haven't, I'm so sorry that I've missed yours. I haven't seen any yellow virtual hands, so I think that might be the end of the Q&A, which is bang on 6 o'clock, which I think is pretty good timing for a webinar. So I'm going to hand back to Charlotte just with a massive thank you so much for being part of this webinar this evening, for having us to speak this evening. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you so much, Charlotte.
Oh, that's an absolute pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. Really, really great session.